Imagine a quiet suburban street in a picturesque town. The kind of place where children play in the yard, neighbors wave across fences, and life unfolds in the most ordinary way. But in the evening of July 9, 2024, one of these homes became the scene of a brutal and unimaginable crime. Ashland Close in Bushey, Hertfordshire, a calm, affluent neighborhood, just a short distance from the heart of London, was about to be shattered by a violence that no one could have predicted. The Hunt family, known for their warmth and close-knit nature, would find their lives turned upside down in the worst way possible. Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt, mother and daughters, were no longer just names in a town. They became victims of a cold, calculated act of revenge. A revenge that began with a breakup and ended in a massacre. For one man, rejection was not something he could simply accept. Kyle Clifford, once a part of the Hunt family's inner circle, could not let go when Louise, his girlfriend of 18 months, ended their relationship in late June. What should have been a simple end to a toxic relationship instead turned into an obsession. Just days after the breakup, Kyle's world took a darker turn. His thoughts were no longer centered around moving on, but rather on exacting vengeance. Kyle planned. And every step he took was calculated with a chilling precision. By July 9, Kyle had purchased a crossbow, knives, and other items that would soon become the tools of his violent revenge. Armed with these weapons, he set out toward the Hunt family home. It was only the beginning. Louise, unaware of the horror unfolding inside, spends her afternoon working in the back garden. Her dog grooming business was thriving, her future ahead of her, when the worst possible thing happened. She walked into her home, and Kyle Clifford was waiting for her. Inside, Kyle tied Louise up, then savagely took her life. But it didn't end there. As Louise lay dying, Kyle sent a chilling message to her family, claiming to return her belongings. When Hannah, the youngest daughter, arrived home later that evening, she found her mother and sister already dead. The house was filled with the echoes of violence. She was next. Her final moments were spent desperately trying to call for help. Through her phone, Hannah sent a final message to her boyfriend. "Call the police now, Kyle's here, he's tying us up." It would be her last communication. But Kyle wasn't finished. Kyle had planned the murders with chilling detail. He knew the family's routine. He knew when they would be vulnerable. The crossbow, the knives, the duct tape, each item carefully chosen. But what drove him to this? Was it just a rejection he couldn't handle, or something deeper? But this was the breaking point. Kyle Clifford's descent into madness didn't just come from the breakup. His own life had been one of anger, frustration, and failed connections. His relationship with Louise had been built on manipulation, control, and subtle threats. She had had enough. But for Kyle, the loss of that control became unbearable. Kyle had been rejected. He could not live with the idea of moving on. So instead, he planned his revenge. He knew the consequences of his actions, yet still, he proceeded. And as the investigation unfolded, the clues pieced together, messages, surveillance footage, phone records, and the chilling confessions Kyle made when confronted by police. Then, on July 10, they found him. Kyle Clifford was located in a cemetery, gravely injured after attempting to take his own life. He had planned for the end, but it was not the end he had imagined. But even as Kyle lay injured, the police had already pieced together his plan. The evidence was irrefutable. His motive: revenge. His weapon: calculation. His actions: utterly unforgivable. But for the Hunt family, and for those who knew them, no sentence could undo the damage that had been done. Kyle Clifford had taken everything from them. A mother. 2 daughters. Gone in an instant. The community was left shattered, wondering how someone they once welcomed into their home could commit such an atrocity. Kyle's rage destroyed a family. His obsession obliterated a community's peace. And no matter how much time passes, there will always be that haunting question: what drives a man to murder the very people who once trusted him? The Hunt family's lives were taken in a moment. Their story is a tragic reminder of the consequences of unchecked anger, revenge, and the loss of humanity. And while justice has been served, the wounds left behind will never heal. The sun had already begun to set on July 9, 2024, casting a soft, golden light over the small town of Bushy. It was the kind of evening that could fool anyone into believing life was as simple as it seemed. A gentle breeze blew through the leafy streets of this quiet suburban neighborhood, and birds could still be heard in the trees. The peaceful hum of a typical British evening filled the air as the streets began to empty, and people returned to their homes from work, school, and errands. Bushy was a place where nothing ever felt out of place. A charming commuter town with tidy homes and well-kept gardens, where neighbors were friendly, and the biggest concern was the occasional traffic on the high street. It was the kind of place where you could leave your door unlocked, and nothing would ever seem to disturb the peace. Carol Hunt, at 61, was a mother who knew what it meant to be there for her family. Warm, compassionate, and welcoming, she had a knack for making anyone feel like part of the family. Louise, her youngest daughter at 25, had recently set up her own business in the family's backyard, running a dog grooming service she'd dreamed of for years. It was going well, and Louise had her sights set on expanding. Hannah, just 3 years older than Louise, had already made a name for herself as a successful beautician, establishing her own career and working hard to build a future. She was in a long-term relationship with Alex Clean, and despite the busy schedule, she always found time to connect with her family. Each of them was living their own version of success, a family with everything ahead of them. They were a team, and their bond was unbreakable. For this family, the day was winding down as it always did. Carol had just returned from the grocery store and was making herself a cup of tea, while Louise checked her appointment book for the following day's grooming sessions. Their routine was simple, quiet, and filled with the sort of calm that comes with familiarity. But little did they know, within the next few hours, their world would be ripped apart. It all began just before 7 p.m. when Hannah arrived home from work. She stepped into the kitchen, greeted her mother with a smile, and mentioned she'd be meeting Alex in a little while. It was nothing out of the ordinary. But then, things shifted, the tension in the air thickening as the front doorbell rang. Kyle had appeared at their doorstep under the pretense of returning Louise's things. A perfectly innocent excuse, one that Carol, being the welcoming mother she was, would never think to question. After all, Kyle had spent holidays with them, joined them on family trips, and shared meals with them. He had been trusted, welcomed into their home. What could go wrong? But behind Kyle's calm demeanor was something much darker, a simmering rage that had been building for weeks. The rejection from Louise had fueled a dangerous obsession. As he stepped into the home, the sound of his shoes on the floor seemed almost muted, as if his presence didn't belong there anymore. Carol, in her kindness, unknowingly invited the danger inside. For a moment, nothing seemed out of place. There was no indication that the family's peaceful evening would soon turn to chaos. But it was about to happen. At 6:58 p.m., Hannah, who had stepped out to get ready for her evening, returned home, unaware of what awaited her inside. She entered through the back door, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. The house smelled faintly of tea and freshly baked bread, the warmth of the home contrasting with the cold intentions brewing in the next room. What happened next would forever haunt the survivors and the community. Kyle Clifford, armed with a crossbow, attacked Carol first, stabbing her with a knife before turning on Louise. In the back garden, Louise continued to work, unaware of the horrific events unfolding just inside. Inside, Kyle returned to retrieve his crossbow, then waited. Time seemed to stretch as the attack unfolded with horrifying precision. When Louise finally entered the house, it was far too late. The door creaked, and she stepped into her own nightmare. The attack lasted for hours. Kyle's actions were methodical, ruthless. And yet, there was one final twist. When the sound of Kyle's movements became apparent, when the fear began to rise in the walls of the home, there was still one piece of hope: Hannah. She was alive, and she managed to call for help. But it was too little, too late. The world they knew was shattered forever, and the haunting question remained: how did Kyle Clifford, once trusted as family, become the monster who ended it all? The town of Bushy would never be the same again. Neither would the Hunt family. And the story was just beginning. Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt were more than just a family, they were the heartbeat of their community. In a quiet town where life was meant to flow smoothly, the Hunts embodied everything that made a place like Bushy feel like home. Their lives were built on love, laughter, and shared experiences that shaped them into the close-knit family everyone admired. Carol Hunt was 61 when her life was tragically cut short, but she had lived a lifetime of warmth, kindness, and giving. As the matriarch of her family, Carol had this extraordinary ability to make anyone feel welcome. Whether it was friends dropping by for a cup of tea or new neighbors seeking advice, Carol was always there. She had a heart full of love and a home always open to others. Her family meant everything to her. Every Sunday, she'd prepare a roast, filling the house with the scent of home-cooked meals, and her daughters would join her, laughing, chatting, sharing their week stories. Carol loved nothing more than these quiet, simple moments with the people she loved most. Her friends spoke of her in glowing terms. Carol was the kind of person who made you feel like you were her best friend, no matter how long you had known her, one said. Her heart was as big as the universe, and she made everyone feel like they mattered. When the violence that ended her life arrived, it was in the form of a trusted guest, a man she had once welcomed into her home. To think that Carol's life, full of kindness and love, would be extinguished so violently left an aching void no one could fill. Then there was Louise, her youngest daughter, a woman with ambition, dreams, and a boundless work ethic. At just 25 years old, Louise was carving out her own path. She had worked tirelessly to build her small dog grooming business, running it out of the family home. It wasn't just a job for Louise, it was her passion. She had always loved animals, and she found fulfillment in making them look their best. Her clients loved her, and her dog grooming services were highly sought after. Louise was more than a hard worker, she was a dreamer. She had big plans for her business, always thinking of ways to expand, to do more. She was the kind of person who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. She was strong, determined, and filled with an energy that could light up a room. Louise was the nicest, most caring person I ever knew, one of her friends said. She always put others before herself. I remember when she took in a stray dog she found on the street, just because she couldn't stand to see it suffer. That was Louise, compassionate, thoughtful, and endlessly kind. And then there was Hannah, 28 years old, a woman with everything ahead of her. She had just launched her own beautician career, working hard to build a future for herself. But beyond her professional aspirations, Hannah was the kind of daughter any mother would be proud of. She was supportive, loving, and always there for her family. While Louise worked in the back garden, Hannah was preparing to meet her boyfriend, Alex. It was a normal evening, filled with the excitement of her busy life, but also with the quiet joy of knowing she was on the path to something greater. She dreamed of opening her own beauty clinic one day. She was full of promise, ready to embrace everything that life had to offer. Those who knew her talked about her gentle nature and how she made people feel at ease. She had a way of making everything feel like it would be okay, a friend recalled. She was the glue that kept things together, always bringing people together with her light-hearted spirit. But Hannah, like her mother and sister, was stolen from this world far too soon. In the prime of her life, with so much ahead of her, she was taken in an instant. Her last message, a cry for help, reverberated in the air, echoing a sound of pure terror, a sound that was the end of everything she had known. The Hunt family wasn't just any family. They were a beacon of kindness and hope, the kind of family that anyone would want to be a part of. Together, they made the world a little brighter. And now, that light has been extinguished. Carol's kindness, Louise's ambition, and Hannah's promise, gone in an instant. And the world, once filled with their laughter and love, now feels empty. The void they left is immeasurable. Their deaths were not just the loss of 3 people. They were the loss of a family, a piece of a community, and a bright future that was ripped away far too soon. For those left behind, their absence is a wound that will never heal. But for the world that once knew them, it is a reminder of the fragility of life, and the devastating consequences of one man's obsession. Carol, Louise, and Hannah will never be forgotten. They were not just victims of violence. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. And though they are no longer with us, their spirits live on in the hearts of those who loved them. It all started like so many relationships, promising, full of potential, and filled with hope. Louise Hunt had met Kyle Clifford on Bumble, a dating app, in December 2022. He seemed like any other man, charming, friendly, eager to make a connection. For a while, things between them appeared to be just another young romance, nothing out of the ordinary. For Louise, it began like a dream. She was kind-hearted, always looking for the best in people. Kyle, to her, seemed like a man she could trust. They spent holidays together, visited family, and shared their ambitions and hopes for the future. He seemed to fit right in with her family. Carol, Louise's mother, welcomed him into their home with open arms. There was nothing unusual about Kyle at first, he was just another boyfriend, another chapter in Louise's journey. But as the relationship progressed, something began to shift. What started as a simple romance gradually took on a different tone. Kyle's behavior, subtle at first, began to show cracks in the facade of the charming boyfriend. As the months passed, Kyle became increasingly possessive. What began as small, seemingly harmless questions about where Louise was or who she was with, slowly turned into something more. Kyle's once sweet gestures became suffocating. He didn't just want to be with her, he needed her to be with him, constantly. His love, or rather his version of love, was something that came with rules, boundaries, and control. Friends began to notice the change. He would always want to know where she was, even when she was just with her family, one of Louise's close friends recalled. And if she wasn't available, he'd get upset. It wasn't just normal jealousy, it was possessiveness. Soon, Kyle's possessiveness turned into manipulation. When Louise began to voice her discomfort, he would apologize, only to repeat the same behavior again. He would claim he loved her too much to let go, to be apart, to trust her with anyone else. It was a cycle, one that gradually became harder for Louise to escape. The tension in their relationship grew unbearable. Louise wanted independence, freedom, and respect for her boundaries. But Kyle saw these desires not as a sign of a healthy relationship, but as rejection. His need for control deepened. What had started as an innocent relationship now felt suffocating. Kyle was no longer the charming boyfriend Louise had met. His insecurities and jealousy seeped into every aspect of their time together. Every phone call, every text message, every missed word was a potential reason for an argument. In the days leading up to the breakup, things had taken a darker turn. Louise had grown increasingly frustrated with Kyle's behavior. The fun-loving boyfriend she had once known was now a shadow of himself, moody, angry, unpredictable. It wasn't an easy decision, but Louise knew it was necessary. The relationship was toxic, and she could no longer ignore the warning signs. She ended things with Kyle in late June, after a family wedding in the north of England, a wedding where Kyle's behavior had embarrassed her in front of others. His arrogance had only deepened. He boasted about his infidelity in front of everyone, and Louise couldn't take it any longer. But for Kyle, this was not the end. It was the beginning of something much darker. Rejection had pushed Kyle over the edge. His pride, shattered by Louise's decision, turned into rage. His behavior, which had been manipulative and controlling, now became destructive. What had once been a minor crack in the relationship, the insecurity, the possessiveness, now widened into an abyss of obsession. Kyle didn't just want Louise back. He wanted to punish her for rejecting him, for making him feel less than. His mind twisted, and his emotions soured. The very thought of her moving on without him became unbearable. What began as a romance soon spiraled into obsession. Kyle's behavior took a dark turn, leading to one fatal decision after another. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Louise, not to another man, not to anyone. And as the days went by, the seeds of violence were planted. His jealousy, anger, and uncontrollable desire for revenge grew into a plan so calculated, so cold, that nothing would stop him from executing it. Kyle Clifford had crossed the line. His mind had been consumed by rage, and the man who once seemed harmless had become a monster. The question wasn't whether he would act on his twisted feelings, it was when. As the time to carry out his plan approached, Kyle's fate was sealed. But the question remained, would anyone be able to stop him in time? Kyle Clifford's world had always been one of control. It was something he clung to, a need to dominate, to bend situations to his will. His relationship with Louise was no exception. What had started as a simple romance quickly became something far more toxic, as Kyle's desire to control her grew stronger with each passing day. Rejection was something Kyle simply couldn't process. It wasn't just a breakup, it was an attack on his pride, his identity. For someone like him, whose entire sense of self was rooted in control, losing Louise felt like losing everything. To him, it wasn't just a relationship falling apart, it was a reflection of his own failure. When Louise decided to end things with him, it wasn't just a personal loss. It was an affront to his sense of power. His immediate reaction wasn't one of sadness or understanding, it was rage. Rage that someone had dared to reject him. Rage that Louise had the audacity to choose herself over him. For Kyle, this wasn't the end of the relationship, it was the beginning of something far darker. He didn't understand that Louise needed freedom from his possessiveness. Instead, he interpreted it as a betrayal. Kyle had been planning this for weeks. He didn't just accept the breakup, he fixated on it. His obsession with Louise became all-consuming. He needed her back, but more than that, he needed to punish her for rejecting him. Every step he took after the breakup was calculated, a slow build toward the one thing that would give him the control he craved, revenge. In his mind, this wasn't about love. This was about dominance, about reclaiming the power he had lost. His obsession fueled his every action. He researched crossbows, knives, and rope. He studied ways to execute his plan without getting caught. For Kyle, this wasn't a crime of passion, it was a methodical, calculated act of vengeance. Each purchase was a piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that would lead to destruction. The crossbow was not a weapon of convenience, but a tool that would allow him to strike from a distance, to control the situation, to ensure that his victims could not escape. But this wasn't just about the physical tools. This was about his psyche, a mind obsessed with revenge, a mind that had learned from the violence in his own family. Kyle's violent tendencies didn't emerge out of nowhere. His family's history of aggression and crime played a significant role in shaping the man he would become. His brother, Bradley, had already crossed the line. Bradley was serving a 23-year sentence for the murder of 2 teenagers after a minor altercation. His violent past cast a long shadow over Kyle, one that he never escaped. Kyle's admiration for his brother's brutality was undeniable. He visited Bradley in prison frequently, yet never once did he express any remorse or recognition of the harm his brother had caused. Instead, he viewed Bradley's actions as a form of strength, a way to assert control over the world around him. This sense of powerlessness, this inability to cope with rejection, led to his darkest decision yet, to hurt the people he once cared for. Kyle was no longer capable of seeing his own wrongdoing. To him, this was not a crime. It was justice, pure and simple. The plan was set in motion. Kyle knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't acting out of impulse, he was acting out of a calculated desire to regain control. The violence that once lived in his family now burned within him, and it would soon explode in a way that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. For Kyle, this was not just a tragic end to a relationship, it was a rebirth of his need for control. He believed he had been wronged. He believed that his anger, his obsession, his desire for vengeance were justified. And in that moment, he thought he had the power to take everything back. But the truth was, Kyle Clifford had lost himself. His need for control, his obsession with Louise, his inability to let go, these were the things that consumed him. In the end, they led him down a path from which there was no return. The crime was horrific, and the silence that followed was deafening. But as the police arrived at the Hunt family home, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, each discovery leading closer to the truth, each clue revealing a man whose actions were as calculated as they were terrifying. The first key to unlocking the mystery came in the form of a message, Hannah's final, desperate plea for help. She had managed, against all odds, to send a message to her boyfriend, Alex, just moments before the attack claimed her life. The message was chilling, simple, yet devastatingly precise. "Call the police now, Kyle's here, he's tying us up." In that moment, Hannah had done everything she could. She had reached out for help. But what came next was a haunting timeline of horror, a timeline that the police would soon begin to piece together. The video footage from a neighbor's camera showed Kyle arriving at the family's doorstep, a calm demeanor masking the chaos that would soon unfold. But at this point, no one could have known what was about to happen inside that home. From that moment, the pieces began to fall into place. Forensic evidence, messages, and surveillance footage provided the backbone of the investigation. The police were working around the clock, piecing together a horrific puzzle that didn't quite make sense. Every step of Kyle's actions, every move he made, was being tracked by investigators, but they still hadn't found him. As Kyle walked away from the scene, it appeared as though nothing had happened. He was moving with a strange sense of purpose, unaware that law enforcement was already closing in on him. Yet, there was one glaring question that everyone in the town was asking: where was Kyle Clifford now? The manhunt began immediately. The town of Bushy, once a place of safety and quiet, was now in turmoil. Law enforcement launched one of the most intense manhunts in the town's history. The media were in a frenzy, covering every new development, every new lead. But Kyle was still out there. Every second counted. Every new piece of evidence brought the police closer to catching him, but would they be fast enough? Kyle Clifford was on the run, and every move he made was being tracked. The police knew his history, they knew his obsession, and they knew how dangerous he was. Armed with a crossbow and a knife, Kyle was a threat not just to the Hunt family, but to anyone who crossed his path. The community, once so quiet, was now on edge. People didn't know whether the killer was still lurking in the shadows, or if he was long gone. The fear was palpable. The officers weren't just chasing a fugitive, they were chasing a man whose rage had consumed him. A man who wasn't just running from the law, but running from the consequences of his own obsession. The question on everyone's mind was simple: could they catch him before it was too late? Then, on the morning of July 10th, the search took a turn. Kyle was found in a cemetery near his home in Enfield. Law enforcement moved in quickly. The helicopter's lights cut through the night, and armed officers descended from every direction. But Kyle was not going to surrender quietly. It was there, in that cemetery, where Kyle Clifford's desperate bid for escape came to an end. He was found, wounded from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had tried to take his own life before law enforcement could catch him, but it wasn't over yet. He was rushed to the hospital, but the manhunt was far from complete. The hunt for answers, for justice, had just begun. Kyle Clifford's capture would bring an end to the hunt, but it would never bring back the lives that were lost. The questions surrounding his actions would remain, haunting not only the people of Bushy, but everyone who knew the Hunt family. And though the manhunt was over, the mystery of why a man would choose vengeance over reason still lingered in the air. The hunt was over, but the battle for justice was just beginning. In the early hours of July 10, Kyle was located in a cemetery in Enfield, his last refuge. Surrounded by law enforcement, with no way out, he knew the end had come. The police had cornered him. But instead of surrendering, Kyle chose to fight. He raised the crossbow one final time, aiming at nothing but empty air. A single shot rang out, then, silence. Kyle Clifford collapsed to the ground, his body crumpling in the cold morning light. But despite his injuries, there was no remorse in his eyes, only an unsettling calm. He was taken into custody, his fate now sealed. As the manhunt for Kyle Clifford came to a close, it seemed as though justice might be within reach. But what followed would leave the Hunt family, and the entire community, reeling. Throughout the trial, Kyle remained silent. His refusal to accept full responsibility for his actions became painfully clear. His actions were calculated, yet during the proceedings, he showed no remorse. He never admitted to the full weight of his crime. The brutality he had inflicted on the Hunt family. The pain he had caused, seemed to have no effect on him. He was a man who had planned murder in cold blood, and yet, in the face of justice, he remained a hollow shell. John Hunt, the husband and father who had lost his wife and 2 daughters in an instant, stood before the court, his voice shaking with the weight of his loss. "I don't care what happens to you now, Kyle," he said, his words cutting through the courtroom. "But remember this. Whatever misery lies ahead for you, on your dying day, there will be no release for you. The screams of hell, I can hear them now." Kyle Clifford's indifference would remain his hallmark throughout the trial. While the Hunt family struggled to find meaning in their loss, Kyle sat in silence, refusing to acknowledge the lives he had destroyed. Kyle Clifford was found guilty on all charges. 3 counts of murder. 1 count of rape. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But for the Hunt family, the sentence could never bring their loved ones back. No matter how long Kyle spent behind bars, it would never undo the devastation he had wrought. The Hunt family would never be the same. Carol, Louise, and Hannah would never come back. The memories, the love, the laughter, lost forever. And the grief they left behind was a weight that would never be fully lifted. John Hunt would never again share a quiet dinner with his daughters. The pain of their absence would live with him every day for the rest of his life. Though Kyle's capture marked the end of his freedom, it didn't bring the closure the Hunt family so desperately needed. The emotional scars would remain, haunting them, and the community that had once felt safe would never be the same again. Justice had been served, but it was cold, distant justice. For John Hunt, there was no satisfaction in the verdict, only the pain of a father who would never again see his daughters' faces, hear their laughter, or hold them close. In the end, Kyle Clifford's actions left a gaping wound that could never be healed. He had taken everything from the Hunt family. And in doing so, he left behind a legacy of heartbreak, grief, and unanswered questions. In the end, the story of Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt is not just one of loss. It's a tragic reminder of the fragility of life and the unexpected consequences of obsession. What began as a simple breakup spiraled into a nightmare that no one could have predicted, leaving a family shattered and a community forever scarred. Kyle Clifford's actions, driven by jealousy, rage, and an uncontrollable need for control, took everything from the Hunt family. The loss of Carol, Louise, and Hannah is not just a tragedy. It's a devastating wake-up call about the dangers of unchecked obsession and the dark places the human mind can go when consumed by anger and pride. The emotional toll on the Hunt family and their community is immeasurable. John Hunt, a father who now faces a lifetime without his daughters and his beloved wife. Friends who will never again hear the laughter of those they once held dear. A neighborhood that once felt safe, now forever haunted by the violence that unfolded just steps away. The questions remain: what could have stopped this tragedy? Was there a moment when someone could have intervened? Could Kyle's escalating obsession have been recognized before it became deadly? This story leaves us all thinking, what drives a person to commit such horrific acts of violence? What is it that turns a man, once trusted, into a monster capable of ending the lives of those he once loved? The answers may never be fully clear. But one thing is certain. This senseless loss will leave a permanent scar on the hearts of all who knew the Hunts. The lives of Carol, Louise, and Hannah were full of promise, and their absence will forever be felt. We invite you to reflect on this story and share your thoughts. What do you think could have prevented this tragedy? How do you feel about Kyle Clifford's actions and the devastation they caused? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected. Join the conversation as we continue to explore the complexities of human behavior, justice, and the impact of violence on our communities. We hope you'll stay with us as we uncover more stories that challenge our understanding of the world and the forces that shape us. Thank you for watching.